Hello, good morning. This is Jacob Grippin of Sizer coming to you with a quick video of the difference between R and RStudio. I must say that R is a statistical programming language, and R and RStudio are both separate applications. You can think of R as the base program. It actually performs the computations and the analyses. R is equivalent to like the engine in your car. RStudio is a tool that you can use to better facilitate your programs and your work. RStudio is similar to like the dashboard of your car. And you need both of them to use. Well, you can use R without RStudio, but you cannot use RStudio without R installed. Obviously, you cannot drive a car with only a dashboard and no engine. So the screen that you see already has R and RStudio pre-installed. However, if you want to download and install this application to your personal machine, you can do that for free, as R and RStudio are both free programming languages. To do this, I open a web browser. I navigate to the Google website, and I type into the search, download R software. You can download R for Windows and Linux and Mac users. So I see, upon searching that, there's this option says CRAN. Download and install R. That's the selection I want. That's the selection I will take. And I see at the top here, download R for Linux, Mac, and Windows. So that is where I would download the R software. Now to download RStudio, I'll go back to Google, back to where I'm searching download R software. You'll see beneath download R and RStudio, but I'll include it in my search. Download RStudio. And the first option, rstudio.com, is what you would want. Again, both R and RStudio are free to download. And since I already have R and RStudio installed on this machine, then I will use those and show a little bit of the features one by one. So I open the Start menu once completed downloading or installing R and RStudio. I scroll all the way down to this R section, and I see here's R and RStudio right next to each other. I'll open the 64-bit version of R, and while I'm at it, I'll open RStudio as well. And I'll jump quickly back to R, as that is the interface. You see, they call this just classic vanilla R, where I just have this console window. And this is where I would type in my commands. And my results would be presented immediately below. I'll use a sample command with the name of the head command to show the first 6 observations of a sample data set. I type head and MT cars. and I press enter. And there are my results printed right beneath where I typed the command. You see this window is called R console. Now I'm gonna go and jump back to RStudio. This RStudio platform has a lot more windows and a lot more going on than what was presented in R. You see the console window on the left-hand side is what is selected. I can type the same command as I did within R and expect the same result. And I do, with these warning messages that come up every time just because of the RStudio that I am using. You'll also notice that when I was using just R, I typed head and I opened the parentheses, but I only opened one of them at a time. RStudio, immediately when I press a left or a right parenthesis, it balances them out automatically. So RStudio assumes that at some point I'm going to want to balance out these parentheses. And the same thing with quotation marks as well. Let's go back to R, the basic R, for a second. As I mentioned in RStudio, there are all of these windows open. This environment window, which shows me the objects, saved objects that would be listed. And I'll do one of those for an example. Using the data set above of empty cars, I'm going to save that data into another sample data set, an object, and I'll just call it sample equals empty cars. Now I see up here within R, the environment window gets populated with this sample data set that I just initiated in the command over here. And if I click on its name, if I click on this plus icon, shows me a description of the variables. And if I click on just its name, a new tab opens up at the top here to visualize my data set, kind of like an Excel spreadsheet. And you see with these buttons over here is where I can make the screen full size, or quite the opposite, reduce it or minimize the screen entirely. Going into R and performing that same command, sample is equal to empty cars, it doesn't give me an error message, and I can still type, let's see, in RStudio, view sample. Let's see what that gives me. I can still look at the data set. However, I'd have to type the equivalent command, view sample, in order to do so. Rather than in RStudio, I could just click it from up here. As that is a key difference between R and RStudio. With RStudio having all of these windows and tabs, I don't have to open anything new, really. Rather, it opens in a pre-existing window, whether that's right here in the environment window, or possibly if I created a figure, it would be displayed in this plots window, and I'll do that next. But in the regular R, when I create figures or when I want to view a data set, a new window pops up automatically. And I'll create that plot like I was just saying. I'll type plot, I'll open my quotation marks, and I'll type sample $MPG. Balance out the quotation, the parentheses, and I see upon initiating that command, my graph gets created and displayed in its own independent new window. Hey! And I can save this graph by clicking on this window, going to File and Save As. You'll notice that this window of R being open and this R console changes the way the menu looks. So different menu options for different windows being selected. If I go back to RStudio and perform that same command, plot sample $MPG, then I get no error message. A new window doesn't open up, but the figure gets created over to the right side of the screen in this Plots tab next to Files and Packages and so on. And RStudio really, it's a way better user-friendly program than just the vanilla version of R. They have the same features, essentially, give or take. Anything you can do in R can be done in RStudio. But I just think RStudio is more intuitive. It has more recognizable features and is certainly more user-friendly, easier to navigate around and perform your work. But any version that you'd like to use is certainly preference. I can navigate these panels to change the orientation of my screen rather than going to File and Save. I can export my graph from here, save as an image. You'll also see that up here in the environment, I could do my history to see all of the commands I've typed most recently, not just in this R session, but all of the R sessions that I've done most recently. You see these ones are what I've done most recently. Another feature in RStudio that's much easier than basic R would be installing and adding packages. As packages, a feature in the open source programming language of R, such that other researchers have created commands and functions for researchers like me to take and use and add it to my R session to have more power. Just for a quick example, maybe I'd want to install and load the ggplot package. I go to this Packages tab. First of all, I could just search for ggplot. And if it's there, which it is in this case, I could check this box and the equivalent command gets sent to my console window, and that is the equivalent of loading this package. If the package that I want to use is not listed in this list, I'd press this install button and search for the name of the package here. However, in R, to do such a thing, there is no side little window for that. There's no dedicated window for just adding packages. There is a drop-down menu though, packages, load package, install package. The load package would be the equivalent of what I did at RStudio by checking that box, and the install packages would be the equivalent of in RStudio pressing this install button. Okay, a few more details to talk about with R and RStudio, and then I'll wrap it up, mostly discussing Windows and the kind of files that you can work on. Where, in this case, earlier I used the plot command. Perhaps I want to get the documentation on the plot command. I don't particularly know all of its features. So in R, to get documentation on any command, I type a question mark followed by the name of the command, in this case, I'll say plot, and you'll see the help documentation comes in a web browser. Gets displayed, in my case, Internet Explorer. Hey, here's the documentation. And if I go to RStudio and perform the same command, a question mark followed by my name of the function, then I can get the documentation over here in the same window, but a different tab of where the plot was created, called the help section. I got help, packages, plots I've talked about. The files is kind of like your own file explorer. I can navigate and open R script files or R files from within here without having to go to file and open or to find it within my file explorer. I can find it all within RStudio. And the goal of RStudio would be to combine multiple features into one large package so that you only have to work with one program at a time. You never have to try to over-confuse yourself. Some more details would be if I want to create a script file, a classic R function in which you'll notice I've been typing these commands one at a time, and the results have been printed to the screen immediately. But sometimes I want to run commands, multiple commands, all at once. Batch command running. In this case, I'd go to File and New Script for R, and you see a new window comes up, just like everything else that's happened in the basic R. And this is where I would type my script. This is a comment. Any line that begins with the pound sign would be a comment. R doesn't interpret those. But I'll take pretty much the commands that I had typed prior. And then I'll run those all at once so that I can see. Now, highlighting in the way this R works, notice how different window open the menu changes. So that's another thing to recognize. If I click on just this middle button to run the current line, that will run one line at a time. And you see it takes the head command that my cursor was on and sends it to the console, runs it, and then goes to the next command. Or I can highlight them all and click this middle button to show all of the details. To save this R script, I go to File, Save As, and pause. Now, to accomplish the same task, but in RStudio, I would go to, similarly, File, New File, and this would be a nice jumping off point as well, such that RStudio can be used to work using the R programming language, but that's not just it. You can use RStudio for creating C++ programs, Python scripts, and more programming languages. There's a feature in RStudio called an R Markdown file that is not allowed in the basic vanilla R. So there are some features in RStudio that are new, can only be done within RStudio, like this R Markdown file, which is awesome. A different video on that later on. But I'll create the R script just like I had. Instead of creating its own new pop-up window, like the normal R does, the console window just minimizes and goes to the bottom here. And my script file takes up the top of the page. I'll type exactly what I had done. And you see also where many features in RStudio is they predict what you may want to type in. In this case, I'm about to select a variable to plot, and it lists all the variables in this data set, so I can pick which variable I want to see a graph for. That's not a feature in R, just RStudio. So RStudio just feels like a new, more recent and updated version of R. More user-friendly, more intuitive, and it appears to have more functionality. I highlight all of those commands, or rather, I put my cursor in the first line and press the run button to run that first command. And then I can highlight them all to run all of them at once, just like an R. Same as file, save as for that do file as well. And that would be everything to mention about R and RStudio. My professional suggestion would certainly be to go in the direction and use RStudio, as it's more user-friendly and it's easier to use than just basic R, but that is preference. Check them both out. Always let me know if you have any questions. You may always email Ciser, that's C-I-S-E-R, @cornell.edu with questions about R and RStudio, whether that's questions with downloading and installing the application or programming questions. Thank you very much and have a day.